Hello and welcome once again to the world of Lord Russell Baker, our regular podcast talking about all the things that's been going on in Lord Russell's wild and very exciting world. And this week we're being a bit topical. We're talking about titles, traditions, iconic landmarks in history. Hi, Russell. How are you?
Good morning, Ed. Yeah, what a scripting we've got today. I just love this particular episode. So much to talk
Yeah,
about. Wonderful.
we're going traditional, aren't we?
We
Lord
are.
Russell, as you are. So I think, tell us how that title all came about.
Well, it's an interesting story. My grandfather, Jim Beddoes, Jim was from my mother's side, so not my father's side, my mother's side. And Jim was a very wealthy man going back in the years. He had lots of land and property in the UK, and of course, including Norfolk. And there was a talk as well about him having land in France as well, but I can't vouch for that. And many years ago, all this surfaced, and then under investigation and genealogy checks, I did employ a UK lawyer to investigate further, and he dug up a title. And of course, through this lawyer, he then wrote to me under the laws of England, Wales, a deed of possession and ownership, which is now drafted and in my possession. So, I do have this deed, which is rather interesting, to this manorial title. But it is a manorial title. That's all it is, really. Just a possession in the same way as you'd own a house. When we own a house, we have a deed, and that deed is our legal entitlement document to that ownership. And the same applies really to manorial titles. So, and I have this deed. That's really what it is. But I do have full and corporal rights of the ownership, hereditary rights, a title which means I can pass it on. So it's quite cool, really. It's quite nice to have. But it is just literally just a possession, like a car on the car park, my house, and a title. So
And yours to pass on, as you say, one day.
Yeah, absolutely. So interestingly, just to sort of go on with this, manorial titles are merely titles of possession, really. That's all they are. And something I own and use to my advantage when raising charitable funding and organising charity events, much of which I achieved before COVID, of course, and COVID put an end to lots of these events I was doing. And now, of course, looking to re-establish again. But it must be stressed. And a lot of people ask me this. I'm not a peer. I'm not a peer of the realm, because there are two types of lords, of course, in the UK. So I'm not a peer. And as such, I do not act as a peer of the realm either. So I don't have a seat in the House of Lords. That's what it comes down to. I'm not a peer. It's purely manorial. And that's the pure title that it is. However, there are some interesting editorials too out there that I am listed within, which is quite interesting. And a lot of this obviously is done through genealogy. One of the areas is Manorial, the Manorial Guild of Great Britain. Now, I did know about this, and I've been listed in under this particular guild for many, many years now. But interestingly, of course, the 18th Duke of Norfolk is also listed on the same page as me as Lord of the Manor of Kenninghall, based in Norfolk too. So it's quite a steep book of listed manorial lords and ladies across the whole of the UK and Wales. And of course, recently, the Manorial Society of England and Wales. I'm listed in there too, which I didn't know about until a few weeks ago in November by a friend when he called me and said, "Oh, by the way, Russell, good to see you listed in the Manorial Society of England and Wales." Well, I didn't know that. So when I checked it, yes, I am indeed listed in that publication. What's interesting is the Manorial Society of England and Wales actually publishes a book every year of the latest additions and alterations, a copy of which goes to the British Library as part of the Legal Deposit Office, so held in history for all time, a bit like my autobiography, My Way. So that's actually also in the British Library, of course, as we know, for the Legal Deposit Office.
That they should be next to each other, shouldn't they?
They should be, actually, but I mean, there'll be lots of them now, because I think the Manorial Guild of Great Britain, they do an annual release, and so there's many of them now in the British Library. So it's nice to be listed in these books and known about. So I didn't know I was in that, and that's an interesting finding in the last few weeks.
It is, isn't it? And I mean, this trend for titles and hierarchy. I mean, I'm thinking of my home village of Brancaster, where the
Yes.
Lord of the Manor used to be a lady up until I think it was the 1960s. The Lord of the Manor now in Brancaster is actually the National Trust.
Yes.
So they took the title under their ownership, and obviously, again, it will be theirs one day to pass on if they deem fit or whatever. It's so interesting. It goes back hundreds of years, doesn't it?
Oh, it does indeed. I mean, it's back to the feudal times. So feudal title systems and structure in the UK is indeed very ancient, and it dates back to, for my memory anyway, I'd have to check further, back to the early 1200s. It's a multi-layered and full of history, and of course, many of the titles are symbolic only, including mine. So no one has any real power these days. Not like they used to in the old days, of course, because the Lord of the Manor did have a lot of say in his manorial area and ruled the people with an iron fist in most cases. But some manorial titles do have assets, even these days, attached, or even unwanted tasks, such as having to cut the churchyard grass and keeping the church grounds tidy. So some do come with some unwanted aspects to them. They don't all have fishing rights, for example. Most, of course, have nothing at all these days.
So better keep your lawnmower ready just in case, haven't you?
You had indeed. And plenty of petrol.
I mean, what it shows is the real power and influence lies within those whose titles are administrative ones, strangely enough, isn't it? Including government.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this case, of course, the House of Commons and the House of Lords both say what they are, literal descriptions. The House of Commons is populated, of course, by the common folk, the MPs, who represent all of us, and the House of Lords by aristocracy. That's always been the way. If you think, it's a bit like a balance between common people and aristocracy to try and ensure legal balance for all, which probably doesn't work that well, really, even today. But there is a balance there. So whatever laws are trying to be passed by in the Commons, the Lords actually have a say on that too. So, and vice versa. I think the Lords used to be one of the highest courts in the land, didn't it? But I don't think that's the case anymore. But it's a check and balance. It's a check and balance, and try and keep a balance with in the country from a legal perspective. So that's how that kind of works.
But you've had experience, haven't you? Working experience, really, of both houses.
Yeah, I have, and we can get into that a little bit here as well. But I mean, it's also worth commenting. The House of Commons is, in fact, one of the real powerhouses these days, especially after Tony Blair's House of Lords reforms in 1999. There's been subsequent reforms too with that. But interestingly, this reform in 1999, which has been an important amendment, which actually allowed 92 hereditary peers to remain members of the Lords in 1999 for an interim period. The Act actually reduced membership of the House of Lords from 1,330 sitting peers to only 669, mainly life peers. True history in the making, even in these relatively modern times.
And of course, you have sat in both houses, haven't you? Although not, as you say, as your title, it's more of a literally sitting there, isn't it?
Yeah, literally. I technically, yes, literally, technically speaking, I have sat in both houses, which is an inspiration. And when you go into the houses, they are so small. When you see them on TV, they look quite large. A bit like most things really that appear on TV. Football stadiums are the same, but they really are very small. But this was all when I provided business services to the Palace of Westminster in 2002. A very interesting role, actually, where I was engaged to establish and document what the critical services were in both houses. The services which must continue in a potential disaster scenario, such as an aircraft crash. I mean, it's near Heathrow. An aircraft would come down and land on the Palace of Westminster at any time, I guess. And therefore, if that disaster happens, what are the critical services? Or indeed, dare I say, in another dastardly assassination attempt. As we know, a well-known example, of course, is the celebrated event for many in the UK, particularly at our age. Ed would remember it very well going back. Penny for the Guy and all these kind of good things was a Gunpowder Plot in 1605. And in earlier centuries, of course, often called the Gunpowder Treason Plot or the Jesuit Treason, which was a failed assassination attempt against King Charles I by a group of provincial English Catholics, believe it or not, led by, and this is an amazing name, really, isn't it? Robert Catesby. Is that a name you conjure with, Ed?
Catesby, yeah. He's not the well-known name, is he? Guy Fawkes is the name we all talk about, but I think he was just a guy that was supposed to light the fuse, wasn't he?
I think so, yeah. Robert Catesby, of course, was sought to restore the Catholic monarchy to England after decades of persecution by the Catholics. And of course, his sidekick, Guy Fawkes, is real. He did exist, Guy Fawkes. And he was Robert Catesby's sidekick, who literally was going to light the fuse and set the gunpowder going throughout the whole of and blow the whole of the Palace of Westminster into Kingdom Come. I mean, it's a massive. When I was there, I actually got down to the catacombs of the houses, and I actually walked into the room where they actually stored these barrels of gunpowder. It's a fairly sizable room, and if you can imagine the amount of gunpowder that was in there, it probably would have blown half of London to pieces. It was huge. So it was an incredible time, and hence the penny for the guy. I remember walking around as a child, collecting pennies outside shops for fireworks and all that good stuff, and building a bonfire.
Yes, you'd have your Guy Fawkes in a wheelbarrow, wouldn't you? And
absolutely,
make him. Yeah. God, I remember doing that as well. It doesn't seem to happen these days. I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man, but they don't seem to do a penny for the guy anymore.
I think that's all changed, isn't it? Halloween's crept in now, the American versions of whatever that is, taken over, isn't it? November the 5th, Gunpowder Day, where you light your fireworks and light a big bonfire and put your guy on top of the bonfire to burn. Oh, God, you don't see it anymore. It's a real shame. And the other part, of course, people forget, of course, is Oliver Cromwell. What an amazing character he was. And I always say, because when I was working in both houses, I did actually, as part of the Commons, go into Oliver Cromwell's office where he would reside in the time going back. And of course, I always laugh at this now because I look at it. And when he used to come into the Houses of Parliament or the Houses of the Palace of Westminster on his horse would go in underneath, and he would get off and tie up his horse and then walk up the stairs directly into his office. So I suppose, technically speaking, he was the first ever underground car park, or in this case, a horse. But that was how it was in those days. It was an amazing office, quite small, but huge history. And of course, I think Oliver Cromwell's death warrant was actually signed in that office by the king at the time. So it's amazing to be part of it.
Thinking of Cromwell, obviously, and there will always be those who advocate the abolition of the monarchy. Yes. But it did happen in 1649 under Cromwell.
It did.
But Britain didn't turn into this nirvana, did it? When that happened, it wasn't suddenly a fabulous place to be in with no royal family and all the rest of it. It was quite hard for people, wasn't it?
It was very hard for people, and I think we shouldn't forget this either. And people who want to get rid of the monarchy these days, take heed really from what's happened historically over time. History has a habit of repeating itself, so don't try and fix what's not broken. Basically, at the end of the day, which is what they tried in those days, and of course, it was a complete disaster. It really was. But interesting times, which we can talk about, I'm sure, as this goes through a bit further. But I just wanted to talk about my role, actually, first of all, at the Palace of Westminster. It was an interesting part, really, going back in 2002, and involved interviewing some really key people as part of the services that must remain running when in times of a disaster, World War or whatever goes on, the defamation of the whole of the services that run within the houses. So I was actually had to go around and interview some key people, and interviewing the Hansard's editors for both houses, for example, which is an interesting aspect. Because if you remember, there's two houses. There's two Hansard editions, papers that are produced daily. And these papers are produced for what goes on in both houses at the time. And so that's an interesting aspect. And the first, when I got speaking to those guys, it was an interesting aspect. And of course, the Speaker of the House as well, Michael Martin, who was elected in 2000 and was the first Catholic speaker since the Reformation. In fact, it was Michael Martin who told me about the clocks in the Westminster Palace of Westminster, a wholly interesting and historical fact. When I first met Michael, he told me about these, and I thought, is he pulling my leg? And of course, when I actually spoke to both the Hansard's editors, they said, "Oh no, it's absolutely true." And they told me, and they said to me, look at our clocks on our wall. They're not as nice as Michael Martin's, are they? I said, no. Michael Martin did have a substantial clock on his wall, but his office was absolutely appalling. In the middle of the palace, no windows, not a very good office at all. But of course, the editors had a lovely office, chaise lounge, windows, but their clock wasn't as good. So it's an interesting story, which we could probably talk about another time.
Very hierarchical, isn't it, in all these places? Even the clocks define your position within the hierarchy. Again, what a wonderful tradition, because I guess back in the day, you wouldn't have a clock, would you? You'd tell the time by looking out of the window and seeing where the sun was.
Exactly. That's how it was in those days, wasn't it? But over the years, this whole thing around the clock on your wall was devised to show your eminence within the Palace of Westminster. So yes, incredible. I had meetings with people in less positions who would have a beautiful office overlooking the Thames, high up, the scenery, chaise lounge in the corner, drinks cabinet. But they didn't have a very nice clock on the wall. It's quite incredible. But a nice story to have learnt about, really, in those days. Wonderful. Bit of history.
It is, and a nice place for you as a manorial lord to go to see what the real ones, in inverted commas, get up to.
Yeah, exactly.
And what a place to visit. You can visit, can't you? But don't you have to ask permission for your MP to go in or something?
You can visit. I think you can pay for visits these days, actually, as well. I think, but since COVID, I think that might have stopped a little bit. But you could pay for visits. But there was a tour. It's a bit like going around HMS Victory down in Portsmouth. You're in and out the door quickly. Not like yesteryears, we could wander around. But of course, if you do pay to go, you don't see everything. They just show you certain parts. So the cabinets, the glass cabinets, which have all the signed death warrants of the kings and queens and Guy Fawkes, I had access to, but the general public wouldn't do. So I had a full pass to go in, and I could walk around freely in both houses. It was brilliant. It's a lovely time. Lovely project.
And of course, they're now spending, tens of millions of pounds, aren't they, updating it and I think doing the wiring for the whole place. That's quite some project.
Well, it's massive, isn't it? You can imagine the wiring in that building must be, centuries, not centuries, but hundreds of, years old. When the electricity was created, of course, it would have been candles years ago. But yeah, the wiring must be awful. And I can remember walking down, seeing signs on doors, beware asbestos. That's how old and how desolated some of the areas are in the Palace of Westminster. So, interesting times. So, it's a crazy moment, really. And when you think about when people fought for their lives, going back to Oliver Cromwell's times, were even more miserable. They quite liked the monarchy back then. Can you imagine a life like that today? So, do think twice when you want to remove the monarchy and change things in this country.
Certainly under Cromwell, no singing, no dancing, no merriment. And of course, this is relevant where we are at the time of this podcast. No Christmas. Christmas was forbidden, wasn't it?
It was abolished. It's complete chaos and anarchy, wasn't it? Puritans, all these dreadful tales. Tough times these must have been. But of course, King Charles II restored the monarchy, and it's been with us ever since. So good times come back. So we must remember that. History has, as I said earlier, does have a habit of repeating itself. So be careful what you wish for.
Indeed, it does. Really. I mean, going back to your title, I mean, do you have any? You briefly mentioned some of the responsibilities you might have. Are you aware if you have any rights? I mean, can you drive your sheep down Little Moulton High Street, for example?
Oh, yeah, very good. Absolutely no rights at all. But we must remember that going back to the early 1920s, actually not long ago, really, is it? 100 years, it became law that the owner of a manor and said title could sell both as separate items, whereas previously the title was sold with the manor or said property. What this really meant, of course, was that the owner had two investments to realise for financial gain. What this meant, of course, is it's not illegal, of course, these days to buy or sell manorial titles in England and Wales. And in some cases, this can be a huge financial asset. Not in all cases, however, as some manorial titles do come with entitlements, for example, fishing rights, or, as you say, legally able to drive your sheep down the high street. There are those parts to it. But, yeah, it's not what people think, really. But yeah, they are. I think there's one title I think the title of Wimbledon went for over £1 million a few years ago. So there are some financial aspects to this.
There are. I mean, you're right. This might have been very different a few hundred years ago, and I'm thinking you as ye olde Lord Russell, the medieval lord of the manor with tenants.
Yeah.
What do you think you'd have been? Would you have been a nice lord or a hard taskmaster?
Oh, certainly wouldn't have been a hard taskmaster. I'm not that sort of way or built that way. So I'd have been the nice person. I'd have been looking after people, making sure everybody was okay, I guess, which is what I kind of do today with my charity work. So yeah, I wouldn't have been a
Well,
hard taskmaster.
that's a good link actually, because you enjoy the title and the responsibility that goes with it, but at the same time, you don't take it that seriously, do you? It's for want of a better word, it's almost part of your brand, isn't it, for the work that you do in the charitable industry?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's fair to say I never take it seriously, never have, but it is now part of my brand, which, as you say, Ed, and has been developed over many, many years now. Hence, as I jokingly say to people, my now famous orange jacket, which is on the front of
Indeed.
my autobiography, My Way. But moreover, I use it for my charity work, as I said earlier, supporting many local charities, which have included East Anglian Children's Hospices. And of course, the patron, of each is Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Cambridge, who, going back, very kindly donated a basket of Prince George's baby clothes to me in 2013. And for my online charity auction on behalf of each in September 2013, a huge donation amongst many other great donations resulting in raising around 15,000 plus for charity.
And events obviously coming up into next year and beyond. COVID, as we said before, has sort of taken the wind out of your charitable sails, but you're up and running again now, aren't you, and getting things planned?
Yes, I'm up and running and trying to plan things again. So trying to get up post-COVID, trying to get things moving. So with events, and hopefully that will also include some charitable events as well. But it's going to take some time to come back, I think, and get the confidence of people too.
Good. I mean, I think before we sign off, we mentioned it last week. We'll mention it again next week. You do have some darts coming up, don't you?
I do. I've got a darts event at Kings Lynn Town Football Club in February, the first Friday in February. That's happening at the club. The tickets are on sale via Kings Lynn Football Club, and we've got some great players. We've got two world champions in my good friend Keith Dello and also my good friend Steve Beaton too. They're appearing, and Russ Bray, the voice. Who just come out actually of the world's actually doing the commentary on there as well, doing what he does for PDC on stage, so doing all the calling. So so it's going to be a great event. So I'll be there as well to interview both Keith, Steve, and Russ Bray on stage. Be a great night, great night of darts.
And I have to say, as an MC, if you've not been to one of Lord Russell's events, then you need to see him in action as an MC. He put a microphone in your hand, and you're a natural. I think your hero Sinatra would be proud of you.
I think he would too, actually. Yeah. And I did do a song actually when I was in Thailand recently. I went on stage and sung My Way. Can you believe it? So I was told to go up and I had to sing it. That was fantastic. Don't mind doing that from time to time.
I bet it went down really well.
Well, I tried to. I can't sing really, but I don't think my voice came across too badly. So that was a good thing. Probably a couple of glasses of wine was enough to get the throat well watered. But yeah, no, I don't mind doing that. Yeah, give me a microphone. I'm happy. Love to MC. It's perfect.
Fantastic.
Good to entertain.
We'll talk about this in more detail on another pod. I think there's so much to cover.
There is.
And we sort of barely touched a lot of it. We'll be doing one more podcast before Christmas, and we're going to be talking about Christmas, aren't we? We haven't quite worked out what we'll be talking about with regard to Christmas, but I think again traditions and history is going to be in there, isn't it?
Oh, it will be. I think it'd be a nice topical Christmas feel. Let's make it very nice, and warm for everybody, because it's going to be quite a difficult time for lots of people this year. Let's be very fair. And to talk about the nice, warm historical aspects of Christmas would be lovely. So let's have some talk about that. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah,
a bit of Christmas
spirit. A little bit.
Absolutely, Christmas spirit. A bit of Christmas cake. Some pies. We can probably share a bit of mulled wine actually on the day, couldn't we, Ed? Really?
Well, we could. That would be nice. There's nothing quite. I went to a Christmas market in Winchester last week, and everywhere you walk, there's this aroma of mulled wine, and it's just fabulous.
That's what you get this time of the year. It's great, isn't it? So apart from the cold weather, this will be my first, I think, Christmas in the UK since 2017 this year. So I'm so used to warm weather at Christmas. It's a bit of a shock to me this year. It really is.
Yeah, you're not going to have your shorts on Christmas morning this year, I don't think.
No, I'm wearing shorts now. Can you believe it? So I've got so used to it that it's very hard to get rid of the the shorts wearing because you get used to them, I do say, with the warm weather. But yeah, it's getting cold now. Even for me, it's freezing out there.
It is
nice.
cold, very much so. Okay, well, that just about wraps it up for this week. We've noticed we're getting lots more subscribers, which is fantastic. We want to say a very big thank you to all of them, don't we?
We do, yeah. Thank you for all the listeners, and thank you for all those that listen in regularly, and all the new listeners too. It is growing. I've got stats recently where we're up to now 178, I think, in Apple Podcasts in the charts. So it's moving up steadily, which is very, very nice statistics, which shows that it's a good show, and we will continue to build it and make it better.
Exactly, and everybody out there is part of it. If you want to ask anything of Lord Russell, drop him a line. Easy to do, and we'll address it in a future podcast.
Absolutely. If you've got anything you want us to talk about, we'll happily do it. So
wonderful.
Be good.
Russell, as always, an absolute pleasure. Enjoy your day. Enjoy the cold weather. Put some trousers on.
I shall do. Oh, well, I'll try to anyway. I can find my trousers. I think they're locked away somewhere. Yes, I have to find my trousers. I'll need some now. It's getting cold. Thanks, Ed. Always nice to speak to you too as well. It's been a lovely, lovely experience again, this episode. I've enjoyed it very much, and I hope the listeners enjoy it as much as we've enjoyed recording it.
Definitely, I hope so as well. We'll be back again very soon. So from me, Ed Cousin-Lake, it's bye-bye. And of course, from himself,
Lord Russell, it's bye-bye too. Have a great time. Have a great weekend, everybody. Speak soon.